Vespucci Sails for America by Ellen B. Cutler. Who was Amerigo Vespucci? Amerigo Vespucci was born in Florence, Italy on March 9, 1454. He was part of a large and well-respected family. Young Vespucci studied subjects like geography, math, and astronomy, or the scientific study of the stars and planets. He also learned to read and write in Latin. He put his education to use in the service of the Medici family. Vespucci was an able man and quickly earned the Medici's confidence. He worked for them in Florence and in Seville, Spain, in 1491. Vespucci's job was with a company that stocked ships with supplies that might be needed during a long sea voyage. A sense of adventure. Spain was a great maritime power, with ships that traveled from Spanish ports to cities in Europe, Northern Africa, and the Middle East. It was an exciting time that stirred Vespucci's sense of adventure and increased his interest in geography and astronomy. Christopher Columbus made his first voyage across the Atlantic in 1492. Vespucci helped stock the ships Columbus commanded on his second voyage in 1493. It was around this time that the two men met and became friends. Although he was no longer a young man, Vespucci was determined to join the search for a sea route to the Far East. He knew the supplies a ship needed for such a long voyage. Because he had studied astronomy, he could plot a course by looking at the stars. In 1499, Vespucci was hired as the navigator for an expedition and embarked on his first voyage across the Atlantic Ocean. A navigator must determine what course to take, how far the ship has traveled, and where it is on the open sea. Navigating by the stars. Navigation is the science of guiding a boat safely from one place to another. Today, there are instruments that show a ship's latitude and longitude. In Vespucci's time, however, navigators studied astronomy and followed the stars. Clouds and storms could easily send sailors off course. Latitude. Sailors used an instrument called an astrolabe to determine latitude. With an astrolabe, sailors could measure the height of the sun in the sky by day or a star by night. From these measurements, they knew how far north or south they were. It was hard, however, to keep the astrolabe pointed at the sun or a star in a stable position while the ship pitched and rolled on the waves. Longitude. Longitude was harder to measure than latitude. Sailing ships often had to take a zigzag course to make best use of the wind. Constant changes in direction made it hard to determine how far the ship had sailed. Dead reckoning was the most common way to measure longitude. In dead reckoning, the navigator followed changes in direction with a compass by tracking how many hours the ship had been sailing and how fast it had been going. From this information, the navigator made a guess about the distance east or west the ship had sailed. The European discovery of America. Merchants brought spices and silk to Europe from India and China. Traveling to Asia by land, however, was difficult. Wars, too, had made the route even more dangerous than before. Columbus thought he could reach the Far East by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean. He was an experienced sailor and persuaded King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain to support and finance his explorations. In 1492, Columbus landed in the islands south and east of what is now the United States. Sure that he arrived in the islands in Asia called the Indies, Columbus named the people he found Indians. Vespucci's voyages. The first voyage. In 1499, Vespucci sailed on one of 4 ships headed across the Atlantic. When the ships reached the coast of what is now South America, Vespucci's ship continued south in search of the passage to Asia. He sailed beyond the mouth of the Amazon River before turning north again. Vespucci arrived back in Spain by June 1500. Vespucci halted his expedition because the boards of his ship had started to rot. He was sure, however, that he had found the route to Asia, and he was eager to try again. The second voyage. The Spanish government was not interested in Vespucci's plans for a second expedition. Vespucci therefore turned to another maritime power, Portugal, which was willing to help. Vespucci embarked on his second voyage from the city of Lisbon in May 1501. Vespucci took a more southerly route across the Atlantic this time, and was able to explore farther down the coast of South America. It is likely that he reached the southern border of Brazil, and he may have gone as far as southern Argentina. His route back to Portugal is not known, but his ship anchored in Lisbon in July 1502. 2 voyages or 4? Did Vespucci embark on 2 voyages or 4? The records are simply not clear. The main source of information about his voyages was the letters Vespucci wrote to friends and government officials. In later letters, he added details and changed some of the dates. Vespucci claims in some letters that he sailed to the Americas 4 times. It is only certain that he made 2 of these expeditions. Vespucci's contributions. Vespucci the Navigator. Vespucci's knowledge of geography, math, and astronomy helped him as a navigator. At the time of his first voyage, no one was sure how far Asia extended to the east around the globe. Vespucci believed that he had sailed along the eastern edge of Asia. When Vespucci made his second voyage, he realized this continent was not part of Asia. He came to this conclusion by comparing what was known about Asia to what he saw in the new continent, which we now know as South America. He realized that this land was a new world to the Europeans. As a result, the way Europeans looked at the world was greatly changed. This is what many consider to be Vespucci's greatest achievement. Vespucci also made other contributions to European exploration. During his second voyage, Vespucci mapped thousands of miles of South American coastline for Portugal. Historians do not know what figures Vespucci used, but they generally agree that Vespucci correctly calculated the distance around the world at the equator within 50 miles. Descriptions of the New World. In his letters, Vespucci wrote that the native peoples he had seen were fast runners and excellent swimmers. He also noted that their skin was almost red, like a lion's mane. Vespucci listened to their speech and decided that each group had a unique language of its own. The people built huts from branches and palm leaves, and some of the houses were large enough to hold 600 souls. The native peoples, Vespucci said, placed a high value on things like feathers or birds' plumes of many colors. They made necklaces from fish bones and white or green stones, but considered gold, jewels, and pearls as nothing, according to Vespucci. Vespucci's last years. At the end of his life, Vespucci was one of the most famous and respected people in Europe. The letters he wrote describing his voyages were copied into several languages and printed in books, including the 4 Voyages of Amerigo and the New World. In 1505, Vespucci became a Spanish citizen. In recognition of his achievements, the Spanish government gave him the job of Piloto Mayor, or Master Navigator. One of Vespucci's duties was to prepare a map of the routes that ships should take to what he called the New World. Vespucci died in Seville, Spain in 1512. Naming the New World. Amerigo Vespucci was not the first person from Europe to sail across the Atlantic Ocean. He did not bring back shiploads of gold and precious objects for the Spanish government. Still, the continents that he described as a new world were named for him. The naming of America. Both Amerigo Vespucci and Christopher Columbus realized that the lands they had found were a continent and not islands. The New World, however, was named for Vespucci. The cartographer Martin Waldseemüller suggested the name America in 1507. When news of the discovery of other lands came to Europe, Waldseemüller was working on a new and more current map of the world. For more than 1,000 years, Maps were largely copies of the one drawn by the ancient Greek cartographer Ptolemy over 1,000 years before. While Waldseemüller knew little more than Ptolemy, he wanted to make his map as complete and up-to-date as possible. The map that Waldseemüller created was the first to show the newly explored lands across the Atlantic Ocean. Waldseemüller also suggested that this land be named Americus, or America.